And I guess back in the day, it was like, well, who didn't have a brother or a sister or a cousin or somebody in the family run away and join a cult in San Francisco?
That was Mission Creek houseboat resident Margaret Casey. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Every week on this podcast, you'll hear from photographers, poets, bartenders, and San Franciscans from all walks of life, telling stories, sharing personal histories, and trying to put into words what makes this city so special. Welcome to episode 29, part 1. In this podcast, Margaret shares the story of her circuitous journey to San Francisco. It ends with the moment when she knew that this is where she belongs. Just a quick reminder that we're asking for your help to keep this podcast free for everyone. Pledge your support on our website at the bronze, silver, or gold level, and we'll send you some cool swag back. Go to storiedsf.com for more information. Here's Margaret.
Okay, so it's 1988, and one of my brothers has been living over here for a couple of years, and I was in a situation where I had only just recently been cleared by the federal police on the charge of stealing a Picasso from the National Gallery in Victoria. Now, I'd just like to say at this point, I did not steal the painting.
For the record.
For the record. I don't think I'd be sitting here if I had. But a group of people calling themselves the Australian Cultural Terrorists had stolen a recently acquired Picasso and then written a series of rather amusing ransom notes where they pilloried the choice to purchase this Picasso and said that the money should have been spent on local artists and that they would not give the Picasso back until that funding was forthcoming.
So that's crime in Australia versus here. Go to the church or the mall and shoot everyone.
Right, a little different.
There it's steal art and...
Yeah.
Say a good cause?
And, write a clever, funny ransom note if you want to get on the front pages.
I don't have a problem with it.
So anyway, long story short was that ultimately, through a series of processes, I was cleared, of course, and then I launched a Freedom of Information search and was able to get the statements that caused the judge to issue a search warrant for my house, and along with several other documents that put it in context. So I was able to figure out who it was that did it. And I think at this point in time, for me, it ended up being, it was much more of a Me Too moment than anything to do with art. And it's very hard to talk about anything once you drop the word Picasso into it. It just skews it in a certain way. Mm-hmm. So what can I say? Thousands of dollars of therapy bills later, I'm able to articulate that it was a Me Too moment. And when people ask me, well, why did those people go forth and make those deliberately false statements to the police, the answer is, well, you would have to ask them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, needless to say, it's 1988 and I am ready to get the hell out of Dodge, not feeling a lot of love from my village of origin. So I decided that I would come over and I would visit my brother. That's how I would do it. I'd never been to the United States before.
Do you know what brought him here?
Yes, he had actually been traveling around South America and had sent home a nice big fat packet of cocaine for someone that got intercepted. Mm-hmm. Oh, he was guilty. So the advice came back to him that he needed to just stay away for a little bit longer and not engage.
Do you know why he chose San Francisco, though, of all the places he could
Yes, because interestingly enough, my eldest sister, I have a big family, I have like 6 brothers and sisters. My eldest sister in the 70s had run away to join a cult in San Francisco. And I guess back in the day, it was like, well, who didn't have a brother or a sister or a cousin or somebody in the family run away and join a cult in San Francisco? So when it was decided that my brother David needed to stay away a bit longer, these old friends of my sisters were, summoned from the beyond, and so he could have a safe place to stay.
So you're like, you needed a change of scenery.
Yes.
And your brother lived here.
Yes.
Where did he live? Where in the city?
He lived at the corner of 16th and Albion in an old firehouse. For people who remember the Albion Club, it was kitty corner from there. And at the time, it was a nightclub. It was called Firehouse 7. He had a gig there under the name of DJ Mink. And he lived in the tower part of the firehouse, the old lookout tower.
Is this the building that's... you said it's kitty corner from Albion now?
Yeah, but only because there's a sort of little jag in Albion.
But is it right across that little alley from Kilowatt? Is that the building I'm thinking of?
Yeah, Kilowatt.
Yeah.
Kilowatt's what the last name I remember it was called.
That Kilowatt is still called the Kilowatt.
Okay, so...
A little different, but no live music.
Yeah, so back in the day it was Firehouse 7, and he was upstairs in the lookout tower, and the other neighbour at the front was Bear Magazine, which at the time was a very popular sort of hardcore gay magazine. So interesting mix of neighbours, and it was right in the middle of the crack epidemic, so there were a lot of people literally crawling around on the streets. And this was before pagers or cell phones, and there were payphones everywhere. And back in the day, if you wanted to score, you had to call your dealer first. So around every payphone, there was always a cluster of people who we came to lovingly refer to as the jive turkeys. I don't know why, but the name just it just fit. So people would call their dealer and then hang up and then wait for the dealer to call them back at the payphone, and then you could go and collect. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a lot of money at the time, and of course I was very, very new. And I spent a lot of time observing the jive turkeys and the various things that would happen in the street. There was a lot of funny characters there. There was a guy named the Red Man who was completely covered in some kind of red ochre. And he wore a hat, and he had a little sort of, Gomez Adams type moustache. And he didn't do anything so much as he just was. So you would see him here and you'd see him there at Adobe Books. And there was another guy named Swan, tall, lanky guy, who lived in a tiny Volkswagen Beetle. And he issued this newsletter. I guess he photocopied or whatever, but it had the tiniest handwriting you ever saw, like the size of an ant. So it was extremely difficult to read this manifesto that he put out every week.
He was letting you into his mind.
He was.
Yeah.
He was, because you could barely get into his car for all the stuff that was in. There was another guy there right on the corner of 16th and Valencia who sold newspapers at the front of a grocery store there. And he always had an enormous rat on his shoulder. Mm-hmm. And I never bought a newspaper from him. I just couldn't. But he was a fixture for many years. And then back at the firehouse, my brother's wife had, because he had acquired a wife at this point in time, and she would refer to this person she called the crack princess. And according to her, the crack princess would keep her would let her know if there was anything going on down in the street that she should know about. So at one time I saw her, as many times that I saw her do this, like bring down a little plate of food for the crack princess, like she was a cat. She's going to put out the food and the cat would come by. But the crack princess was around for a long time. I don't know if she ever gave Marla the heads up about what was going on, what was going down in the street, but she put a lot of store by that method of communication.
So you're kind of almost airdropped into the middle of this world you just described.
Yes.
Welcome to San Francisco.
Truly. And I had not thought of myself as a naive person, and I had traveled extensively and done all kinds of things. I think I was already, in my late 20s. But saw a lot of things that really blew my mind.
And you're like, yeah, this is where I belong.
Kind of, sort of, yeah.
I'll spend a good 40 some odd years here, sure.
Well, I recognized it as a place where people could, people had a lot of latitude, you had to be extremely weird before you could be considered weird. And that gave everybody a lot of room in which to play before they crossed the boundary into, what I came to call the night shift.
I like that.
And it didn't take long to realize I belonged to the day shift and I needed to just concentrate on making my way in the world via the day shift.
Yeah. I like what you were just talking about with the weirdness and people pushing each other. It's like competitive weirdness.
Yes, indeed.
It's unspoken, but it's...
But it was there. And so you could trip out down the street in your flowing robes or your coloured hair or, living your dream. And
that's one of the things I like to think is still here. It's diminished.
I think it's diminished. And yes, it is still here.
Still part of the city.
The tolerance is still here. And I think we have to, we should really in some ways cherish these people.
So you decided that you're on the day shift, excuse me.
That's right. And I had the good fortune not long after that. Let's just say my brother's house was was troubled and chaotic and, they just threw everything on the floor. But I met a person named Paul Brown, who was one of the founding members of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence.
Oh.
He was Sister Logan Berry Frost.
Okay.
Because he wanted something that was sweet.
Yeah.
And he and I and a couple of other people ended up in a big old Victorian house on Fell Street.
I was going to guess in the Western Addition.
Yes.
Area.
So then I stayed in that Western Addition area for quite a few years. And, of course, back in the day, Western Addition wasn't so nice either. There was a lot of rundown projects along Haight Street and Page Street, and it was a pretty sketchy neighbourhood. And around that time...
A lot of night shifters.
A lot of night shifters. A lot. And so during that time, I had decided that I really was... The only path left for me was to be a starving poet. Okay. Now, I don't think you can pick a more competitive field than starving poets. It's brutal. The prizes are few and far between. Yeah. And,
especially here. It's a poet's town.
It is. And I had the good fortune to meet Diane DiPrima, who was, of course, one of the Beat Generation and a very great poet and author in her own right. And I had started doing workshop classes with her, but then we became close and I would go to her house once a week to help her sort things out, help her with her tax returns, help her, get things edited and organized. And she was incredibly generous with herself. There was something about her that was, that embraced you. And she gave generously of herself. So she, whether she knows it or not, was huge in my life for just providing that kind of maternal warmth. And of course, she had been one of the Diggers, that radical group that existed around the Haight area in the late 60s and early 70s. And she told me that because I was a little... I may as well say I was a little ignorant about race relations. It wasn't that I was insensitive, but I didn't have a familiarity with how it played out here in the United States and specifically in San Francisco. And she told me that when she had been married to a black poet, Amiri Baraka, at one point in time. So she had an insight into life as a black American. She told me that what they would do was if you saw a young black man pulled over by the police or being questioned or harassed in any way, the thing to do was you went right up and said, "Can I help you? Is there something I can do for you? Can I call someone?" And that you just straight up intervened and did what you could to open it up. I think these days everyone's just afraid of being shot. So it's a little intimidating. But also back then that area, that was the first time I heard of people kidnapping yuppies' dogs. Right? I think it was birthed on Hayes Street, actually.
I've never heard this.
Yeah, a couple of people got their fancy dog napped, and then they'd post, missing posters, and then they'd get a call from someone like, I got your dog, but if you want him or her back, gots to pay. But one night I was walking home from Diane's house. She lived on Page and Laguna, just near the Zen Centre there. And I lived up on, at Fellon Central. So I was walking home past the sketchy areas, and I just came to the start of the Panhandle. It was dark. And somewhere in the park, someone was playing a saxophone and playing it beautifully. And it seemed so magical. So many contradictions, and then just this spot of pure beauty that I think it was that was the defining moment for me, that I felt I have to be here.
That was Margaret Casey. Join us Thursday when Margaret will tell us about getting her houseboat. Music for the podcast is by Otis McDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the stuff we do besides this podcast. Find the nearly 80 episodes on our website, storiedsf.com, which is also where you can now go to pledge your support for the show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show for us. Send comments or suggestions to storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.